Hello class, hope you enjoyed your lesson on idioms yesterday. Now we're going to get into the textbook and begin Unit 8. This is going to be Lesson 1 on independent and subordinate clauses. So in the beginning of the year, we learned that a clause was a group of words with a subject and a predicate. That was a clause. We also talked about independent clauses and subordinate clauses when we learned about complex sentences. Remember that a complex sentence is a combination of an independent clause and a subordinate clause, and complex sentences have been encouraged by me for you to do when you are writing, just to kind of experiment. It doesn't have to be, every sentence doesn't have to be a complex sentence, but encourage you to play around with that this year. Let's take a look at the 1-minute warm-up on top of page 396. You should have your books out right now, and let's go through this together. I want you to find the two clauses in the sentence on top of page 396 where it talks about 1-minute warm-up. Go ahead. Feel free to pause the video while you're doing it. I'm just going to assume that you're pausing. All right, did you come up with the two? All right, so the clauses are, 1, we had to stop. The next clause is when our hands ached fiercely from the cold. Okay. Now, the first one is an independent clause because it can stand by itself as a sentence. We had to stop. Okay. The next one, when our hands ache fiercely from the cold, cannot stand alone as a sentence. Remember the example that we did in the beginning of the year. If you walked up to someone on the street and said, when our hands ache fiercely from the cold, they would be like, okay, what happened when your hands ache fiercely from the cold? And the reason why is because it can't stand alone by itself as a sentence. All right, so it is a subordinate clause, and it begins with a subordinate conjunction. Hopefully some of that's coming back to you. All right, so clauses have both subjects and predicate parts. A phrase does not. We're going to get into that in a second. So independent clause has a subject and a predicate, but it can stand alone as a sentence. It expresses a complete thought. All right. A subordinate clause has a subject and a predicate, but it begins with a subordinate conjunction, and it cannot stand alone as a complete thought. All right. So number 1 here, the air grew cool. That's an independent clause. The air, subject, grew cool, predicate, stands alone as a sentence. Okay. A compound sentence has 2 or more independent clauses. Please note this example here under number 1. The air grew cool, comma, and it rained. So we have 2 independent clauses there combined with a conjunction junction. What's your function? That one in particular conjunction is comma and. Number 2, subordinate clause is a subject and a predicate, but does not express a complete thought. It cannot stand alone as a sentence. It depends on or needs an independent clause to complete its meaning. All right, so like we said before, subordinate clause and an independent clause together make up what we said was a complex sentence. And so if we look here at this example under 2, when the sun set, the clouds appeared. The clouds appeared. Subject, the clouds, appeared, predicate. It's got the 2 parts, so it's a clause. Now, which type is it? Well, it doesn't begin with a subordinate conjunction, and it stands alone as a sentence, so it's an independent clause. Now, the subordinate clause, we know it's subordinate because when the sun set cannot stand alone as a sentence, but it has a subject and a predicate. The sun, subject, set, predicate. When the sun set is a subordinate clause. All right, so the sun set would have been an independent clause, but look, we have the subordinate conjunction when in front of it. You'll also note that there's a comma after the subordinate clause. So when you have a complex sentence, remember again, a complex sentence is when you have a subordinate and an independent clause in the same sentence. When it begins with the subordinate clause, you must use a comma. But if we were to flip these around, so if it were to be to read, the clouds appeared when the sun set, we would not need a comma because the independent clause came in the beginning. All right, so those little things are things that we should start remembering and doing when we're writing, okay, and recognize these things. And there you see the examples there. Before spring comes, comma, it will snow. So you get the subordinate clause first, then the independent clause. You need a comma. But if you flip them around, put the independent clause in the beginning, you don't need a comma. All right? Number 3, clauses can be introduced by the same words that introduce phrases, such as before, after, until, and since. A clause always has a subject and a predicate, remember. A phrase never does. So I'll see you before spring comes. All right, so before spring comes would be the clause, subordinate clause. And then look at the next example where it says phrase, before, here it is, before sunset. All right, now sunset is that's a subject, but what does the sunset do? There's no predicate there, so it's just a phrase. Okay, so independent clauses and subordinate clauses have subjects and predicates. A phrase will have one or the other, either a subject or a predicate. All right, let's go through our book examples. Here's a nice summary of what we just talked about, clauses, independent, subordinate clause. Let's look at number 1. Each of them are a clause, numbers 1 to 6. Is each one subordinate or independent? All right, number 1, he will arrive. Well, there's a subject, he. Will arrive is the predicate. Looks like it's a clause, right? Is it subordinate or independent? Well, I don't see a subordinate conjunction in front of it, and it seems to stand alone very well by itself as a sentence. So I'm going to go with independent clause in that one. How about you? All right, number 2. Since you aren't going, and feel free to pause after I read these so that you can kind of have some time to figure out on your own. I only have 15 minutes for my lesson here. So since you aren't going, okay, you aren't going, okay, we got a subject and a predicate, but then I have the conjunction since in front. If you walked up to someone on the street and said, since you aren't going, they would be like, yeah, I'm not going where? What do you mean? All right, so it can't stand alone as a phrase, or I'm sorry, as a clause. Number 3, I didn't like it. Okay, seems to have a subject and a predicate there. Let's see, can it stand alone? Yes, then it must be an independent clause. Number 4, what do you think? That's going to be subordinate, right? Subject, predicate, and then we got our conjunction in the beginning of it. Same thing with 5. That's going to be what do you think? Soon Carrie will leave. Yeah, that seems to be able to stand alone as a sentence. Soon is not a subordinate conjunction, right? Until he departs. Okay, until he departs, what will happen? Please finish your sentence. So that would be a subordinate clause. It can't stand alone as a sentence. All right, number 7. Is each group of words a phrase or a clause? What do you think of 7? Is that a phrase or a clause? Until the end. Yeah, the end. It only has a subject, right? It doesn't have a subject and a predicate, so we would have to go phrase on that one. After the rain ended. The rain, subject, ended, predicate. So that would be a clause, right? From the helicopter. The helicopter is a subject. There's no predicate anywhere, right? So that'd be a phrase. Number 10. Another shift came on. Subject, predicate, conjunction. It's a clause. Before he could leave. He, subject, could leave, predicate, clause. In some areas. Nope, there's no predicate there, right? So that would be a phrase. Before the storm moved on to the northeast for that one. That's a pretty long clause there, isn't it? Got your subordinate clause, or conjunction here, rather. The storm moved. Okay, subject, predicate. Number 14, in spite of the intensity of the storm. What do you think of that one? Seems like a lot of words there, right? Almost be, kind of strange if there wasn't a subject and a predicate there. But the intensity of the storm isn't doing anything here. There's no predicate, so it's a phrase. Okay, don't be fooled. And then 15, before the next shift began, subject, predicate, clause. All right. Page 398 I'm on now. It says identify each group of words as a subordinate clause, an independent clause, or a phrase. I want you to pause the video now, work through 16 to 25 on your own, okay? And then I'll come back and I'll give you the answers. All right, I'm assuming you did 16 to 25 by now. So 16 was an independent clause. 17 was a subordinate clause. 18 subordinate. Notice the subordinating conjunctions in front. Number 19 was an independent clause, stands alone as a sentence. Number 20, when a tornado hits. Yeah, what happens when a tornado hits? You didn't tell me. That's a subordinate clause. Number 21 is a subordinate clause. 22 is an independent clause. 23, that would be a phrase, okay, in the safest place. 24, what would that be? Would you have phrase for that one? Okay. During a powerful storm. The storm's not doing anything, so there's just a subject, not a predicate. And then 25, soon the storm will end. Okay, that's independent, or soon the storm ends, independent clause, stands alone as a sentence, subject and predicate. Okay, so in summary and conclusion, notice that all three of these are kind of a variation of the same sentence. So the game ended. Okay, that stands alone as a sentence. It's got a subject, game, predicate, ended, right? It's an independent clause, also known as a simple sentence, right? And that's what AKA means, also known as. Now, look what happens when you just add a subordinate conjunction to the beginning of it. You now have an entire subordinate clause after the game ended. It cannot stand alone. You walk up to someone on the street, you say, after the game ended. Yeah, what happened after the game ended? See, you left them hanging. So that's a subordinate clause. And then, if you just had the game, all right, well, the game's not doing anything. You're not telling anything about the game. And so you have a subject there, but you do not have a predicate part. So that would be a phrase. So remember, clauses, subjects, and predicates, phrase, one or the other. All right. Hope you enjoyed our lesson for today. And you have an assignment that will be, it looks something like this, okay? So it's on independent and subordinate clauses. There's two sides, so don't forget to do both. And this is assigned today, Tuesday, and it will be due at the packet drop-off on Monday. All right, if you have any questions, reach out. Please watch these videos. If you're struggling with it, make sure you also are watching the Powtoons video that is also on the EduBlog site. All right, just to make sure that you got it. All right, if you have any questions, reach out. We'll see you tomorrow.